first grade, I had the most horrific experience with a cat. I was sitting at our dining room table doing my homework. You could hear the sound of my parents doing dishes in the kitchen, and you could smell the aroma of our spaghetti dinner. When all of a sudden, my paper began getting wet, one drop at a time, from my tears of frustration. My homework that night had a paper that was divided into 3 sections. At the bottom of each section was a word. And my mission, which I had no choice but to accept, was to draw a picture that went with that word. Ball, no problem. Tree, no problem. Cat, big problem. I could not find any way to put lines on paper that in any way resembled a cat. I erased that paper so many times, it looked like one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And my dear parents, they had the patience of saints. They brought me scrap paper, lots of scrap paper. And I tried over and over and over to draw a cat. Finally, many hours and many tears later, I can't do this! Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and anyone else who has said, I can't. The next day, I took that Dead Sea Scroll to school, along with a pristine note from my parents that said Walt really, 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 really tried to do his homework. At least that's what they told me it said. And that day, I labeled myself as someone who can't draw. And as I got older, I did what many of us do. I started collecting labels. I was an A student in school, but you put me up in front of the class, and I didn't look like it. I would get nervous, paralyzed, choke on my words, and not look very bright. And I would label myself as someone that can't perform in front of an audience. I have stage fright. When I was in 8th grade, I wanted to go to a technical high school called Bosco Tech. And Bosco had an entrance exam where, in addition to math and English, you had to take a mechanical aptitude test. A few weeks after taking the test, I went to see the counselor, Brother Joseph. Mr. Grussel, what shop do you want to go into? Electronics? I said, good. If you had wanted to go into mechanical, we would have had to talk. And that day I labeled myself as someone who can't think in 3 dimensions. I have no mechanical aptitude. As an aside, a few years after this, I bought a condo and I tried to hang a screen door. The first set of holes went on the wrong part of the door jamb. The next set of holes went on the right part of the door jamb. But the door opened the wrong way. Would you say Bosco's got a pretty good mechanical aptitude test? In the early 1900s, the early 1990s. I'm old, but I'm not that old. My brother was visiting from Texas, and we were supposed to get together for lunch. But I called him up and say, hey, Carl, I got to cancel lunch. I got to call a plumber. I got a dripping shower. He says, don't call that plumber. I'll come over and help you fix it. So my younger brother came over and helped me work on the shower. And he said, never call a repairman. Always try and fix it yourself. If you screw it up, then call a repairman. You'll save lots of money. And besides, just because you couldn't do something before doesn't mean you can't do it now. So in addition to fixing my shower, my kid brother fixed my thinking. Just because you couldn't doesn't mean you can't. A few years after this, I was watching television and channel surfing, and I came across a PBS show called Imagination Station, where they taught kids how to draw. I videotaped that, again, my age, But, but I played the tapes back, and I learned how to draw. I'm no Leonardo da Vinci, but I can draw. Just because you couldn't doesn't mean you can't. In the early 2000s, I mentored a high school robotics team in the mechanical design of a robot, and we won some awards. I do have the ability to lead a mechanical design. Just because you couldn't doesn't mean you can't. And in 2006, I joined Toastmasters, and in 2008, I took improv and stand-up comedy classes, and I've reached a détente in stage fright. Just because you couldn't doesn't mean you can't. I tell friends and associates, hey, you really ought to try stand-up comedy or improv classes. What do I hear? I'm not funny. I could never do that. I can't. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or can't, you're right. How do you think? And remember, just because you couldn't doesn't mean you can't. Madam Toastmaster.